Yeah, so funny, embarrassing, and maybe one that many other people can relate to. So this happened a number of years ago. My wife and I were traveling, and as often happens, we had flown in late the night before to this city, and we had picked up a rental car, and we had driven to the hotel, and we had gone to sleep. And it was in a major urban center, so we had valet parked the car. So we got up the next morning to get ready to go out and start our day. It was very busy at the hotel. I gave my valet ticket to the desk to get the car, and a white sedan pulled up. And my wife and I knew it was a white sedan we had rented, and my wife and I got in the car and we drove off. You probably can guess what happened. This was maybe about 9 o'clock in the morning. Sometime around 2 or 3 in the afternoon, my wife says to me, "There's a folder on the back seat of the car. Why don't you get it and open it up? We're going to need it for where we're headed to." And I turned around and I said, "There's no folder on the back seat of the car." And at that moment, there was this very unsettling feeling that came over us for the first time, like something's not right here. And I don't know why, but she looked in the glove compartment and sure enough, found the rental agreement for someone else. And of course, we panicked and realized that we had gotten in the car and driven off. Because as you know, all rental cars look alike. And particularly when you had come in late the night before, all you knew was it was some generic white sedan that we had rented. We immediately drove back to the hotel, and I went and spoke to the desk, and the valet guy who was there was completely panicked because he was the one who had given us the wrong car. Our car had pulled up after ours, and the other renter had immediately recognized that that was not his car. And the valet guy said if we hadn't come back and turned in the car, he was going to get fired for giving us the wrong car. So I felt terrible about the whole thing, but I can see on the smiles on your faces, this could happen to anyone. And it's so easy when you're at a busy hotel in the morning, lots of valet rental cars being pulled up. You just get in one that you think is yours, and you just drive off.
I'm smiling because I thought you were going to find something else in the glove compartment.
I didn't check. I didn't want to know. All I knew was I had stolen someone else's rental car. So embarrassing, the funny, but also completely understandable how something like that could happen, especially for those of us who travel quite a bit.
Hello and welcome. I'm Karen Rosenfeld here with Omer Glass, GrowSpace's CEO. Today's guest is Paul Moskowitz. Paul has over 30 years of experience in driving cultural evolution, executive compensation, succession planning, and talent management. Paul has held C-suite leadership roles at major organizations including Sysco Corporation, Dean Foods, and Yum Brands, where he served as the Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer. Hello and welcome, Paul.
Hello. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We always like to jump into the success stories. Our listeners are always looking for ways to create programs that make an impact in their orgs. So can you share with us what's been some of the most successful talent development programs of your careers? And, why was this program so successful? Talk to me about, what your goals were, what you were up against, and how did you pull it off?
Yeah. Happy to share a particular one that I'm very proud of, and the headline is it was successful because it specifically addressed a business need that the organization had. So let me just do a little bit of setup. This was with one of my prior organizations in the largest business unit. We had a very key P&L leader role. Some might argue the most influential role in the organization. And we had about 70 plus of these leader roles across the business. And we had a historical model of developing people to go into those roles that had worked very well. We had a centralized selection process. But then once we identified people who were ready to be in a developmental role, pathing to that P&L leader role, we basically had used for a very long time an apprentice program. So we placed them on the team with a currently very successful P&L leader role, and it was a 12 to 18 month apprenticeship program where they learned directly from that very successful P&L leader role, and then they were able to transition into that role. And we were able to do some predictions based on talent needs and retirement paths, how many we were going to need to manage the flow of the people in that. And that worked very well until we started to introduce tremendous transformational change into the business, which was changing dramatically the role of that P&L leader. And so they were going to have to do different and new things that those P&L leaders had not previously had to do. And so, of course, an apprentice model is fine in a stable environment when you just want to keep replicating what you had previously done to stay successful. As soon as you introduce change and you need those roles to do new things, you're going to have to take a different developmental approach. So there were a couple things we did. One, we had to identify from a profile standpoint what were going to be the critical skills and capabilities that new P&L leader role was going to have to be able to do and possess in this transformational world going forward. And as you can imagine, that changed all of our talent needs because some of the current incumbents were able to adapt and some weren't. And in many cases, it simply accelerated their retirements out of the organization. So our talent needs went up and our talent pipeline in the traditional sense went down from an internal standpoint. So we knew we were going to have to also supplement with external talent as well as continue to look internally. And so we had to change our whole developmental approach. Our selection process remained centralized, but it changed based on the new profile. We then continued to place those people into roles in the P&L business units with that smaller group of leaders that we felt like was going to be able to make the change, but we knew we had to do a lot more. So we supplemented with much more centralized on-the-job experiences that we needed them to have in those business units. We supplemented with classroom and virtual based development, particularly focusing on those new transformational skills that were going to be needed. And then we also supplemented with executive coaches because we felt like those people were going to need additional support and help from a third-party expert because it was going to be all new for them. So it was a multidisciplined approach of on-the-job training, classroom or virtual based development, and individual one-on-one coaching. And we needed that all to continue to happen in an experience that was only going to last 12 or 18 months because my talent needs were going up in the organization. And I had to have the flexibility to both accommodate internal candidates who had knowledge of the organization, as well as now for the first time, external candidates who came with great other experiences, but perhaps didn't have the specific knowledge of our business. And I had to be able to flexibly design the development experience depending upon what the individual brought to the experience. So it was a complete overhaul of how we thought about development, driven by transformational change that was coming from the business to meet the needs of the organization in this still incredibly critical P&L leader role. It didn't happen overnight, as you can imagine, but I'm incredibly proud of the shift we made and how we had to bring the organization along in order to keep that pipeline robust for that critical role going forward.
Wow. First of all, I love it. No, because there are few elements. Number one, I think like apprentice model is easier said than done. Especially like you know because yeah, it sounds like match someone with someone who they will do their job in 12 months, but then reality is more complex because like it's like probably you have a lot of operational struggles there. So I think one place I would love to double click on is how exactly do you do that? How do you set it up? How do you like set expectations? What do they shadow? What do they do not shadow? Probably one-on-one sensitive stuff. So I think that's where like that's something that maybe a lot of our listeners will be interested in. And the second thing is how do you connect the different parts of the puzzle? Like you mentioned like on the job training, then kind of like classroom based, and then one-on-one coaching. So how do you how do you basically weave them together? Because those are like three separate elements. So I think the connectivity between them is very interesting about like how you did that. And then I have follow-up questions later about like the one-on-one element. But let's start with that.
Yeah. So from an apprenticeship standpoint, right, it was a combination of making sure that they had critical role experiences working underneath that existing P&L leader. So in some cases, people lacked certain role experiences, and we wanted them to have that role experience and get the direct coaching and apprenticeship from the incumbent. In other cases, we wanted them to work on special projects that would drive significant change in the organization under the tutelage of that existing leader in that business unit, because we knew going forward, being a very effective change leader was going to be a critical skill set for success going forward. What I think made it successful were a couple of things, Omar. One, very senior executive ownership of the business unit leader, right? So that business unit leader was very clearly the sponsor of the development program and made it very clear to the organization that this was a priority for that business unit leader. We then relied on our talent management team to run the program on a day-to-day basis. So they were the ones who were tracking each of the participants in the program, where they were in the program. And interestingly, we were constantly starting people. So this wasn't like we started a cohort at the beginning and then they all graduate in 18 months, because talent is a pipeline that flows, and you can do a lot of planning and predicting, but you can't be 100% accurate. So you have to be ready all the time with folks. And so each of them almost had their own customized timeline of the experiences that we wanted them to have on site in the business unit, as well as making sure that they were coming into that cohort of folks, and we were constantly rolling the programming that they were needing on a centralized basis, so that by the time they finished the 12 or 18 months, they had a complete set of exposures. And then we had executive coaches that were standing by all the time, that were ready to connect with those folks. And I will tell you that was done virtually as well, because these folks were scattered. In this case, it was a U.S. business unit, so they were scattered all over the United States. So the coach wasn't necessarily physically in the same geographic location. So I would say executive ownership, critical for success, right? A talent management organization that was tracking and managing to make sure people were getting the experiences they needed and how people were successfully acquiring these skills. And then, of course, the third thing was holding that local P&L leader, who still played a critical role in overseeing development, holding them accountable, as well as making it clear to the organization that this was recognition for them, that they were being identified as very strong leaders to have people from this program participate in their P&L business unit, because not everyone got to participate in the program. Right. So I think it was a combination of all of those things. And ultimately it becomes, it's not a separate program. It's woven into the way we do business. And of course we had a robust, we call it a people planning process. Some people call it talent planning process, that regularly also would bring in progress checks, right, on where people were, as well as continue to do forecasting on what our needs were going to be going forward. And we used supplemental supplemental external recruiting to augment where we saw we had gaps in driving internal pipeline flow through the people planning process.
And can I ask what metrics you were measuring success against? Like, how did you know this was a successful program?
A great question. So we had readiness assessments. So first of all, identifying at that 12 to 18 month process, were people ready? So first of all, was I matching my needs with my pipeline? And did we have people ready? Right. And then importantly, how quickly and how strongly could they get out of the gate going forward? So again, this is a P&L business unit with a pretty robust set of metrics, financial metrics, operational metrics, customer metrics, people metrics, right? The typical set of looking at a business unit's performance from multiple dimensions. And we would look at how quickly could people get out of the gate. Because that's the other really critical measure of a successful development program, right? Which is, if someone comes out fully ready, do we minimize the ramp up time for them to have an impact on the business? Absolutely.
What was the difference? Like, was ramp up time normally 18 months and you got it down to 6 or 12?
Yeah. So interestingly, we weren't looking to shorten the ramp up time or the development time in the program.
No, I ramp up to me. I mean, I could be wrong, but to me, that's the ultimate outcome, right? How ready are they really? That's all of the work you did in this program, was to get them ready, so that, like, when you flip that switch and say, now it's your P&L, if they're immediately ready out the gate, or within a quarter, like, to me, that's robust success.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, it depended on the business unit they were taking over. In many cases, they were taking over successfully performing business units from a person who had simply decided to retire from the organization. And so what I was looking for there was no dip in performance, right? In other cases, we had perhaps proactively made a change in the business unit leader for performance reasons. And so we were starting to look for bending the curve, right? And again, to your point, there were a robust set of metrics: sales growth, margin, right, operating income, customer satisfaction, operational metrics type deal. So it really was, the metrics were in place for evaluating the business unit to begin with. We didn't have to put new metrics in place for it. It was integrated into the business. And in each case, perhaps what needed to happen was different by business unit if it was a bit of a turnaround situation. In some cases, they were operationally maybe solid, but they weren't getting the sales growth they needed. And in other cases, there were some real flaws in their service and in their operational metrics that needed to be fixed in the existing customer base before we could focus on new sales growth. Right. But that was the key metric. And look, these were the people who were generating like 90% of the operating profit of this business unit. So there were, the importance of all of this was critical. I will say what we didn't expect, there was a lot of skepticism when we realized that we had to go out and hire externally. right? There was this belief that you sort of had to grow up in the organization. It had to be hard coded into your DNA for you to be able to evolve to this senior P&L leadership role. And so there was tremendous skepticism and a belief that an external hire was going to pick a number, 2x as long, 3x as long to successfully complete the development program and be ready. And of course, what we found was they weren't taking any longer. What we were able to do was hire externally folks who had already been in organizations that perhaps had experienced much of the transformational change that we were implementing. So that part was not hard for them at all. They just actually simply needed to learn the mechanics of the business. And I'm not ever suggesting that mechanics are easy to learn, but if you focus on that, sometimes that took less time than actually helping internal folks learn the skill sets to drive transformational change. And so the skepticism around the ability of externally hired candidates to then go through this development program and get placed in that role faded over time as they saw specific examples of it. And I think that was very healthy for the organization, Karen. I really do. Because as you know, a healthy balance of external hiring and internal development, particularly for key decision-making roles, I think ensures a proper balance of new ideas coming into the organization with an understanding of how do you help the organization move along that change curve.
Yeah, I love that. And also it means that people know that they can be grown in-house too, that they know they have opportunities. They don't have to constantly be looking elsewhere to get to that next level.
No question. No question.
That's awesome.
And, you know, Omar, to your point, the organization, again, large organizations don't turn on a dime, right? But I would say within a reasonable period of time, 2 years maybe, right? Internal folks who wanted to progress to that P&L leadership level started to really understand that this is what they needed to pay attention to be considered a viable candidate for entry into this developmental program. Right. So it did ultimately help the rest of the organization understand, right? What I don't, because before what I was doing was I was watching my very successful P&L leader for whom I had worked, and really just trying to figure out how to emulate what that leader was doing, because I knew that was the recipe for success going forward. Now they had to shift their focus to something else, right? Which was being driven by this transformational change.
That's brilliant. And actually, another element that I think worth highlighting, and I see more and more companies do that, is instead of the cohort-based approach, which is usually what companies do, is kind of like you create the structure and then you drip them even one by one. So all of them are doing essentially the same program, just now it's not in a cohort that you start and finish, but more tailored, especially when you're talking about executives. So I think
It's
it's brilliant.
yeah, much more a rolling base. I wish, Omar, business was nice and neat, right? Where I could say, okay, in exactly 12 or 18 months from now, I'm going to need X number of ready people to move into this role. Life is just not, life is too messy. And quite frankly, even the best forecasting is still going to miss, right? And so this idea of this is an ongoing rolling kind of program where still everyone gets all the critical experiences they need really helped us address the way the business actually was moving and evolving.
That's awesome. All right, now we're going to take a harsh left. We're
Okay.
going to talk about your less than stellar story, the time where you kind of swung and missed, but I also really want to lean into what you learned from that and what you took with you moving forward.
Yeah. There's a smorgasbord of stories to pick from here. So I'll pick one. Actually, this is a benefits story. It's not a talent development story, but another part of human resources. And I was in a senior leadership role where I had overall responsibility for benefits for the organization. And in conversations with with many leaders, it was very clear that we had an issue. We were missing a component of our benefits program that was causing us to have a handicap in the marketplace, right? Those conversations were very clear to me, and it needed to be addressed. So I, as a results-driven person, thought, okay, so here's the benefit plan design that we need in order to make this happen. Here's what we need to implement it. And then, like, I was out of the gate, right? I hired a consultant. We had a plan design. We're moving down the path. I put together a project team, right? And we are going to make this thing happen, and we are going to fill a gap, right? And we got, I don't remember how far, but several months, let's say, right? Down the road. And I started to have some just informal conversations with other senior leaders in the organizations, maybe the CFO, maybe some heads of operations, maybe the head of IT, just some colleagues. And they were like, what are you talking about? Like, when did we agree to that? Right? And I said, of course we agreed to that. Remember we had conversations about this, and we all agreed that this was a gap in our offering. We were handicapped competitively, and we needed to do something about it. And they said, well, yeah, I mean, we had some conversations about it, but we never actually agreed to anything. And like, I'm not sure I'm okay with this. And it was like, and this was more than one leader. And it was like, I was like, can you see me? Are we like in reality? Because I was stunned by these conversations. And it was a very, very a painful lesson for me to learn, which was, you may think you have alignment. You may think but what some people call maybe just theoretical conversations or generalized conversations, versus when they actually are willing to go, yes, let's go do this, right? And I was far down the path. I mean, I had spent money. We were with consultants. We were in detailed plan design. We were in all these other things. And of course, I couldn't do it by myself. I also needed cross-functional support and help in order to get it done. And what I realized was, I was like far down the path, look left, look right, ain't nobody standing beside me. And that's a very bad feeling. let's just say that. And so
summarize the emails.
Yeah, right. So what, to your point, Omar, what I learned a couple of things. One, people have different standards in their minds around what does alignment mean, right? And don't assume, because we all know what happens when you assume. I learned the critical lesson for anyone who works on a team or in an organization of size, which is there is no such thing as over communication. That concept simply does not exist. When you think you've done a good job communicating, driving alignment, gaining support, confirming, to your point, Omar, when you think you've done a great job, do it again. Do it again. And I'll any day I learn from that, I'll take the risk of somebody saying to me, enough. I don't need any more communication. I'd rather have that feedback than, what are you talking about? We never agreed to that. Right. And it was, I was able to fix it and turn it around. It did wind up costing some more money, because obviously when people did finally get engaged, they had some input and feedback that caused us to do some rework, right? And so that happened. And I was accountable for all of that. It wasn't a fatal mistake, but it was a lesson that I learned. And it was very impactful, and there were times when it was very painful for me. But I'm thankful that I learned, in my career early enough that I was then able to not make it again.
That's the thing. Also, a lot of things get lost in translation between just two people speaking. And sometimes you and I will speak, and each one will get out of the conversation understanding something completely different. And like sometimes I had it really 180. So I think, yeah, I learned it also. If there is something that's not super clear, and I will take your suggestion, even if it's clear, communicate it, send, okay, summarize email. Those are the points. We're in agreement. Good. Moving forward. And if you do not do that, it's a recipe for a lot of trouble.
Right. And that has to be woven into the ongoing way that a project gets led, right? So opportunities to provide updates, opportunities to clarify and confirm, and of course, you're going to drive more ownership if all along the way you also give people the opportunity to provide input. Right. So it's also about making people feel like they've been heard and actually not just making them feel you actually hearing them, I should say, and ensuring that they're aligned along the way. And you know, because by the way, most, if not all, good projects in organizations require cross-functional collaboration. So at some point along the way, you're going to need help from other people. And if they aren't aware, but more importantly, engaged and you know and feel ownership for that, the train's going to come off the tracks at some point. Yeah. So it was a key lesson that I learned, Karen. Please don't make me tell any more stories like that. There are some, but that's enough pain for one day.
It's interesting that it still stings like all this time
Oh,
later.
it you know when you bring it up, and I've been asked this question before. To your point, yeah, I feel it. Yeah, I absolutely feel it.
Crazy. Well, so I'm going to make you look back, but in a positive way now. So, final question. Looking back now, if there was a piece of advice you could give to your younger self just starting out in his career as a CHRO, what piece of advice would you give? What skills would you tell yourself to focus on if you could go back?
Yeah, and you want me to go back to my first entry into being a CHRO?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Um, so I'm a huge believer in the value of onboarding. It's something that I think a lot of people talk about, and they say that they're going to focus on having a quality onboarding experience, but unfortunately, I think organizations move at such paces today that it's so easy to get swept up in a daily vortex of what's happening in an organization that you forsake a really quality onboarding experience. And I tell people when they go into roles, whether they're senior roles or not, be selfish, right? You whatever that onboarding time, and it's at least 90, maybe 180 days, whatever it is, when the halo of being new and using that halo is still possible, you should do that. And I would say you want to do two things. And I look back and in my early CHRO days, and maybe I didn't do them as well as I could have. One is forget whatever functional hat you wear and just immerse yourself in what are the drivers and obstacles going on in the business right at the moment. What is top of mind? What is helping the organization be successful? And what is really a challenge for the organization to overcome to be successful? Forget whether you're an HR person or a marketing person or an operations or an IT person. Try to understand what is it that is going to help the organization be successful, right? And then use your functional expertise, in my case around people and culture and capabilities, to synthesize through how can I help the organization, right? Either drive forward, maintain momentum or overcome obstacles. Filter it through that functional expertise, right? I tell people, look in your magic bag of HR tricks and see which one you might be able to use to help the organization go forward, right? So that's point number one that I would tell people, right? Focus on and spend the time to really go deep on what's happening from a business strategy, business performance standpoint. At the same time, right, look for a couple of quick wins with key partners and clients that you know are going to help you be great partners for maybe addressing some of the longer term issues that you've identified from the first part of your conversation around the business, right? All of which then leads to hopefully a really robust conversation that you're able to talk to your key partners. And again, if you're a CHRO, your key partners are going to be the head of operations, the CHRO, the CMO, the CIO, certainly the CEO, right? All of these other key C-suite leaders, where you can have a conversation that goes something like this. Let me summarize for you what I have heard people tell me is going on in the business right now. Did I hear it correctly? So please validate for me that I'm understanding what we as a business team are trying to accomplish to move the business forward. Let's get validation on that. Okay? And then you say to them, let me separate some quick near-term things from some longer-term things. If I did 1, 2, 3 of these low-hanging fruit things, how would you feel about that? Yes, no, right? Get some validation and you have to have a fair degree of confidence that we could deliver some of those quick things. And usually, and every organization has it, right? You know, somebody's going to tell you, if you would just fix the fill in the blank, life would be so much better. Like, so go fix it for them. Why? Because it's a pain point. It's top of mind. And secondly, because it's going to show you've listened and because it shows you can get stuff done. Right? And then secondly, you're going to say to them, okay, and from a longer term strategic perspective, if I focused on helping the organization build capability in these areas, move the culture in this direction to promote and support and drive the more significant business strategies that we're doing, would I be focusing me and my team on the right things? Right? So what you wind up with is a sort of near-term quick wins while you're getting yourself organized for making sure that you're aligned with the longer-term ways that you can really drive and impact the business as the leader of people, capability, and culture that's aligned with the business. And the only way you're going to do that is if you really devote a significant amount of your mind share as a new CHRO to that quality onboarding experience. And sometimes you really do have to resist that daily vortex that's trying to suck you down, right? And you might have to say, I'm not going to get involved in that. If there's something going on, there's someone better on my team who can help you deal with that, right? Or whatever, or we're just going to set that aside because I'm trying to get ourselves set up for success, both in terms of building credibility and in making sure there's alignment that we're working on the right business priorities going forward for the organization.
That's absolutely brilliant. I love that. Also, it shows very quickly that you were the right hire, right? Because you're automatically making an impact. People are paying attention and they know that you're listening and they can come to you and help, and you'll help them solve business issues. I love it.
And Karen, you're never going to get those first 6 months back. So spend that time really thoughtfully and wisely to build that credibility in the organization. Absolutely.
Amazing. Well, I want to thank you for joining us. This was amazing and
Well, thank you.
so interesting and enlightening, and just a little embarrassing for you, which is always enjoyable for us. So
Thanks for allowing me to relive a funny moment and a somewhat viscerally painful moment as well.
hope we didn't rub too much salt in it, but it was, I think, those moments that we'll put the embarrassing one aside, but I think the moments that those like deep cuts where we can learn so much, I think they're valuable for everyone. And I can't imagine someone who wouldn't take away a tremendous amount of value from your experience.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk to y'all.